series. We are super excited to have start this week with a very unique topic. And everyone, welcome, whoever is joining from on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We are extremely glad to have you with us. And we expect that this is a knowledge sharing platform. We are here for the community. And if you can just forward the link or share the link with your friends, family, colleagues, then our purpose will be served to reach out to as many people as we can and help our community as a whole. So with that, we begin our session today. Our topic today is creating a resilient workplace culture through change management. And managing change isn't always simple and easy. So there are many different moving parts when change happens. And here it's very interesting, the speaker, when she gave the information that she will be focusing on each level of an individual in organization: the self as an employee, the colleague or collaborator, and the manager or leader or business owner. So we will have each one perspective here, I guess. We all play a critical role in organizational success, so knowing it from each perspective is crucial. So with that, we have, and I'm very honored to introduce to you our speaker today. Her name is Nadira Ramcharan, and she is a consultant, coach, and unstuck leadership development trainer and nonprofit executive. She focuses on building partnerships with stakeholders and setting strategies for program operations, projects, and talent management. She integrates diversity and equity goals into measurable HR outcomes related to hiring practices, performance, promotions, retention, policy and practice review, and accountability for change implementation. So she strongly believes that employees are at all levels, regardless of roles and titles, should have access to professional development opportunities and career paths to support their professional growth. And she is a mother of 5-year-old kid, and she keeps herself busy working and as well as keeping her toddler also playing with her. It's her pastime. And with that, thank you so much, Nadira, for joining. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. As Julan mentioned, I'm Nadira Ramcharan, the president and CEO of NRNY Consulting, and I'm also the founder of Unstuck Leader. I started my business in 2014, and since then, I've been helping small businesses with their operations. I've been coaching professionals to reach their full potential and elevate their leadership voice, and also provide trainings to professionals to enhance their performance in the workplace and in their career. So really finding clarity around what it is that they want to do and do well in their current position so that they can level up in the future. I see myself as like helping people navigate through the various challenges in order to develop long-term solutions. I mean, short-term solutions are really great, but we really want to think long-term when we develop solutions and also implement change. So I started my business because I really wanted to help people. And I started out helping entrepreneurs with startups develop business plan. And fast forward, I've been working with individuals, youth and young adults, professionals, and business owners. And as such, I've created the Unstuck Leader program to help others shift from feeling or being stuck to becoming unstuck, right? To get clarity around their next steps and career pathways, and really think about, what does it mean to manage myself? How do I manage up? How do I manage others? So there are all these different moving pieces that create a whole person, that create a whole team, and that create a whole organization. I also work with organizations to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in their HR practices and policies. So really thinking through, what does an employee handbook look like? What's included in it? How does it create equitable policies for staff at all levels of the organization? and also looking at a hiring process, like what does that look like from beginning to end? So thinking about recruitment, selection, and ultimately engagement. So those are just some of the many different types of work that I do. And for this particular topic around change management, I would typically, take about a half day or even a full day with this topic because there's so much to really dive into and pull apart. But I've condensed it for this webinar. So as you have questions or ideas, please pop them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it as I'm presenting. And also there will be a Q&A section at the end during our session closing. So you'll be able to ask me questions, and I'll also be able to provide some practical examples towards the end. So just moving us along on our agenda, I will present our session outcome. So we'll just have one outcome for today since we're together for a short amount of time. We'll do a session opener or a community builder. Really want to get to know each of you that's with us today. And then the three areas of our content is really self-management through change, collaborators for change, and leading through change. Lastly, we'll do a session closing. So by the end of this session, you'll be able to implement strategies for integrating change management principles to create a really resilient workplace. Additionally, it's about creating proactive strategies for overcoming feelings of resistance. And we'll talk through the resistance piece a little bit more when we get to the self-management topic. So for our session opener, in the chat box, if you could respond to these two questions: what is your leadership style and what is your ideal career role? And if you're someone who has a business, then I'd love for you to share with us your business goal, or what is your role in your business, who is your target market, so anything else you'd like to share. You can just type that in the chat box. And I'll also give some examples in terms of leadership style. So sometimes I know that I've identified myself as a relational leader. I really love getting to know people, building sound relationships, being able to work well with others. And in order to do so, in order to get buy-in to achieve goals and outcomes, I really take it upon myself to get to know someone as a whole person, as a human being. So that's just one example of a leadership style.
So can you give three options so that it will be easier for us all to choose quickly?
Yep, yeah. Sure. So one is a relational leader. So I explained, building relationships with people, really caring for that. I think another one is someone who is very results oriented. So thinking about the outcomes first and always having that at the forefront. I think another leadership style is, I think someone who is very reflective. So who reflects before before implementing change. So processing information, really thinking about driving results, but really being reflective. And I'll just type those options in the chat box. Julan, I see that you wrote some aspects of all three. I'd love to hear, like, how do you balance all of those different styles?
I would say more the relationship building, but at the back of my mind, definitely that is going on. That yes, it has to be result oriented. It has to be, I reflect. I'm thoughtful about it, but mostly I would say the relational leadership. But definitely those points are there, or those parts are there,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Yeah.
it does. So really having or building relationships as a stepping stone to get to everything else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm just looking at the other responses in the chat box. So it's giving directions, implementation and planning, motivating. I see more relational, process oriented, results oriented, comfortable moving. I think also with our leadership styles, having some flexibility around when we implement that style. So I think it also depends on the context or the environment or the experience that's occurring in that given moment. So I think that the reflective or thoughtful piece could also come before even like being a relational leader, right? Like, what is our intention for building relationships with people? How do we want to build relationships with others? How do we want to get to our goals or accomplish those goals to be really results oriented? I just think that we each have like our own process for being reflective and thoughtful about how we show up as leaders. And also, I'll share that you don't have to have a leadership title to be a leader or to even have a leadership style. We're all leaders regardless of what we do in organizations. Leadership is really how you influence yourself and others to create the best outcomes that impact stakeholders in the most positive way. So I'm going to move us along. Thank you for those who contributed in the chat box. It was really great to see what your leadership style is. So now we're going to go into self-management through change. So in the chat box, again, we're just going to quickly think through the following guided questions. How do you typically manage change? And was there a time when you were resistant to change? What was the reason for your resistance? So we're going to talk a little bit about resistance in the next slide, and then also about self-management. But I just want to get an idea of how you have previously managed change and what that experience was like for you. So for example, like if you manage change, some of us manage change well. I think I manage change well depending on the environment. So when I just started out in my career, I didn't manage change well because I didn't have a lot of experience to fall back on. And then I think also it was just where my mindset was at the time. So I think also considering your level of experience, are you also relying on past experiences to manage change? So just some ideas to get us started around how you manage change. Any thoughts around that? July, accept change with a positive attitude and see if it is working. You can see if it's working by getting feedback from others, from a manager or a colleague.
Yes. Yes. Or by itself as well.
And I think that when it comes to change, I know for myself that I can feel it, either somewhere in my body, right? Like something's happening where I'm feeling something towards a particular change that's occurring. And so it's just really about taking a step back and identifying where that thought or feeling is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in an organization, do you have much choice not to accept it? When a change is coming, because for the simple reason that we do not, somebody who is trying to bring this change is thinking of a future, right? Thinking that it will be on the positive side. So, the best way to deal with it, I guess, to get along with that and then see actually, is it happening or not, is my take on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Sometimes we don't have a say in change, and I'll just move us to the piece around owning and managing our own internal conflicts. So, as mentioned before, change isn't easy and it doesn't have to be challenging. It's really the conversations that we have with ourselves that are critical to how we show up in a workplace that is evolving and rapidly changing depending on the external environment. So we look at what is happening around us and wonder why it's happening. Why aren't we included in all the decision making processes? Why aren't our voices included in the changes that are being implemented? And I mean, really, the list goes on about the questions that we have about the changes happening around us, and sort of questioning those who are making those decisions around that change. So the more we tell ourselves a story, the stronger that story gets, especially if it's a negative story. And sometimes we complain without even knowing that we're complaining, and venting and complaining can really only go so far. So sometimes our first reaction to changes, depending on what it is really resistance, right? We may get defensive. We may even create some anxiety for ourselves. We may worry about our own role and responsibilities in an organization. We might, become fearful about what's going to happen to our role. Is it going to be shifted? Is it going to be eliminated? I mean, just there's so much uncertainty that comes with change, especially if we don't have all the information all at once, and also if we're not included in that process around implementing change. So really thinking about what is the best version of yourself, what is your happiest self, what does your most successful self look like? What if you brought your whole self to work rather than just part of you? So everything starts and ends with you. Like, you are the only one who can really take in what is happening around you and identify what your thoughts and feelings are, which is really the best first step. Um, Another thing that I recommend is unlearning. There's so much beauty and value in unlearning what we've learned previously. It creates opportunities for growth and success. Part of unlearning is letting go of a previous experience or story that we've told ourselves. So in the past, if we experience change in a very negative way, then we're going to take that experience and bring it with us to what's happening in the present moment. We're going to continue to have the same conversations with ourselves. We'll continue to think the same way. And really, it's just being more open-minded once you unlearn. Also, thinking of shifting change, means that we're losing something. So when something changed, we're losing something that we're familiar with. But if we shifted from change equals loss to change equals winning, it just creates a different perspective for us. And just going back to quit complaining and start showing up really in the most powerful way makes a difference in how we view change and how we accept it. I mean, some changes are not that great. And I think for me as a professional, just going back to early on in my career before, I became an executive, I always wondered why my voice was not included. And now that I'm an executive, I think, the tables are, it's different. It's very different. And I can see why I may not include some staff in my decision-making processes because, one, it's very complex. There's a lot of confidential information. And I'll go into the leader portion shortly, but I think just viewing it from, from a staff member standpoint compared to a senior leadership standpoint, I can understand now why decisions were made without my voice or without my ideas or without my input. So I'm just going to pause there. I know that I just shared a lot, so I'd love to capture any questions anyone might have on this particular piece. I mean, there'll be room for like Q&A after, but if there's a burning question that you have for me, please let me know in the chat box. And I'll just give it a few seconds to see if anyone has anything. Okay, so I'll move us along. So the next portion of our content is Collaborators for Change. So being a collaborator, when you think of someone who collaborates really well, who works well with others, who shows up very positive in teams and, in all these different workplace environments, I think going back to our leadership style and identifying what that style is. So for example, if you're being a relational leader, you will build sustainable relationships with others, right? Like you'll get more buy-in, you'll be much more supportive. You can help people with shifting their own thinking by providing a different perspective. I think sometimes when change happens, some people fall into what's called groupthink. So one person may feel a certain way and then others may buy into how they're feeling, into how that particular person is feeling. So if that particular person is very resistant to change, they start talking negatively about what's happening around them, and they're sharing their feelings and their thoughts, and just like their process for processing that change, then that could also lead to other people feeling the same way. And what we want to do is not engage in groupthink, separating ourselves from that type of thinking and helping people to really develop a mindset that's more of like a growth mindset, right? I think anyone who may be engaging in groupthink has like this fixed mindset. So we really want to move people from having a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And also developing trust. I think trust is such a big part of change management and how we implement and accept change. I mean, change, whether it's good or bad, is going to happen. And it's going to happen because it ultimately impacts the people we serve, all of the stakeholders that are involved, our target markets, our profits. And so when you develop trust with others, by getting to know their work and how they're being impacted, even as colleagues. In my experience, there's some colleagues who may have very different viewpoints about change. And I think that's okay. I think to understand that everyone's going to have their own opinion and perspective based upon their own experiences. So if you can influence others with your leadership voice, right, like elevating your leadership voice to create change, in someone's perspective and helping them to elevate their own thinking is really about influence and goes back into your leadership style. So I'm going to pause right here and see if there are any questions. I'll wait a few seconds. Okay, I'll move us along. So leading through change. So as leaders, we may wonder what it takes to get employee buy-in, but do we really listen to understand, or are we ready to just take control? Instead, I encourage people to tap into, the part of your brain that you used to use when you were kids, right? Like having fun with it. I think also, when it comes to change, like you're creating possibilities. So creating a team activity where people are vision dreaming. This is my own term for daydreaming, right? Vision dreaming is where where each person on the team is looking at their own vision for their roles and then for their team and the organization. then the leader will also create their own vision. And then look at both visions side by side. Like just look at the vision side by side so you can see where you're in alignment and where you're misaligned. That will start a conversation to help you think through with your team and even individuals, like what they're struggling with, right? Like why, if a vision is very different, you'd want to see where those discrepancies are, right? Like what's the misalignment, what's coming up for them, really having a conversation and grounding it in what their vision is. Also, I think as leaders, we want to be able to share our visions with people. We want them to know what our hope is for the team, what our hope is for an organization, what our hope is for individuals. So really looking at all those different levels are important. And I think that once you provide clarity and you communicate your vision, I think you're more likely to get buy-in from people who may be more resistant to change to begin with. And then also viewing feedback and pushback as being respectful, right? Like in the workplace, when someone provides feedback about what you're changing or what you're implementing, or they may even have some pushback, it doesn't mean that they're being disrespectful, right? It doesn't mean that their voice isn't welcome if they don't agree with something. So just going back to the control piece, like we can't control, when we implement change, we can't necessarily control how people are going to feel or what they're going to think about it. So if you create a space to gather feedback, here, like really listen to understand where that employee is coming from, employer, staff member, or colleague, you can really get a sense of like what's coming up for them and sort of coach them through, again, sharing with them your vision and then having a conversation about what their what their feedback is about or why they're pushing back. So really getting to the root cause of that, that feedback and really creating a safe space to have those transparent and authentic conversations. That's really the best way to get feedback from others is if you're having a transparent two-way conversation and that other person feels like they're being heard. And also people also have really great ideas too. So thinking about like how do you incorporate some of what you've heard into the changes that you're going to implement. Providing context and not in an email. I think that we all get many emails, and sometimes in an email, when you're sharing something that is being changed or a new system or process is being implemented, yes, we want to provide as much context as possible. I always recommend not doing it in an email first. It's always best to bring people together to have a conversation. Right now that we're, many of us are working virtually, we still want to be able to make those connections in like a Zoom room, for example. So you want to be, as a leader, we want to be able to share as much context as possible. Like, why is this change happening? Like, what's the purpose of it? Who does it impact? And in the next slide, I'll go some more deeply into that. I'll pull that apart a little bit. But communicate that, verbally, and then follow up in an email about some of the next steps or just reiterating what you shared out in, like, for example, a staff meeting. So there are different ways to communicate that, but I feel like the best way to do that is just give people that face-to-face time so that they're like seeing you and hearing you and they're not making up these stories in their minds. And you really want them to have as much information as possible. I think, and lastly, just I think to stop setting expectations and start creating agreements is also very critical when it comes to change management. And as leaders, we want to influence others so that they're able to be very receptive to change and to be able to implement new ways of doing things. And sometimes we set expectations so high that it becomes very difficult for people to meet those expectations. So, for example, if you're putting in a new process in place for one particular, individual, you might say, I expect you to get this done, or I expect you to learn about this new system in 7 days. that person may become anxious and they may feel like, maybe that time frame isn't the best time frame to get that done. So really start creating agreements, right? You'll get more buy-in if you create those agreements where, as the leader, you're asking if this is something that staff member can complete in a timely manner. So just really shifting the language and shifting the perspective so that people feel good about change. I mean, yes, they may still have, feedback and pushback, and they may still be resistant. But if you start creating agreements, it also holds people accountable to their work and what they're, expected to do, but without using the word expectations. So that, the word expectations may always be in the back of their mind. So instead of like feeling like people are pushing back for a bad reason, just really embracing it. We have a desire to have others agree with us, is really, is really connected to, just being in control. It's not something that we want to do. We have to get really excited about disagreements and know that that's okay. People who disagree with you are bringing energy, like really great energy to the table and the workplace. And by genuinely listening to people who disagree with you and considering their viewpoints, you really increase the opportunity for them to get on board with the change. And you can help spot any gaps in practices or thinking that you didn't previously notice or wouldn't even acknowledge. So it's really great to hear what other people are thinking so that you may even reconsider implementing that change right away. Again, and also the biggest blind spot when it comes to change management is failing to solicit feedback from employees, like really every step along the way. I'm not saying that they have to be involved in every single, decision-making process, but I think just having some sort of like feedback loop where you're sharing information, getting thoughts and ideas, making it really engaging. And I think I would also tie this back to your leadership style, depending on what that is. So, without checking in with others on a regular basis, think about like, how do you know that you're successful at implementing change? How are you capturing that feedback regularly so that it increases transparency and really gives people a voice in the change, which allows them to feel that they're truly being a part of the process. And lastly, I do want to share just in terms of as a leader, just being or becoming a change storyteller, right? Like keeping people committed for the long haul, as we think about employee retention and engagement, we want them to stay with us for a while. So they need to know what's happening that's meaningful for them and how it impacts their overall work in the organization. They also need to be able to take that story and share it with others, right? So when they're being a collaborator for change, what you're sharing with them, they're going to share with other people. So being mindful of the type of information that you're sharing with them. And also, if something is very confidential, you'll share that with them too. So that, you don't want people to make the mistake of like assuming or making any types of assumptions and or making mistakes when they're sharing the story with someone else. So now we'll move into design thinking and change management. So design thinking is an iterative process in which we seek to understand others and challenge assumptions, and also redefining problems to identify alternative strategies and solutions that might not be instantly apparent, with our initial level of understanding. Design thinking also provides a solutions-based approach to solving problems. So especially for those who have leadership styles that are very like results-oriented, process-oriented, just really thinking about outcomes, this is really great. A really great way to organize your thinking and your process for developing solutions. So this is, design thinking is more of a hands-on method where you're really pulling apart a process for change. So some questions that, leaders might want to consider, or even managers, or even individuals, is like who? Who from the organization needs to be involved in the change? Who is likely to be affected most by the change? Who is likely to obstruct the change? Like who's, most likely to get in the way of it? And also who, makes the final decision? And then for the what questions, which I completely left out here, but I'll just share them out anyways. Thinking about what practices need to be changed, what services must be communicated to stakeholders, what behaviors need to be changed, what resources will you need to share with employees? And then also thinking about what are you trying to accomplish as you're implementing change. Some of the why questions are, why do we need to change our practices or policies? Why do we need to communicate, new services to our stakeholders? Why do we need to change our treatment of employees? So really getting down to like the why. And I would probably start with why first. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we in this position to make this change? For where questions, where are the changes most needed? Where do we have, support for the changes? Where does management stand with regard to the need for change? Where will, revenues come in to implement the change? So thinking about some of those various factors. And for the when questions, when will management consider implementation? When should we communicate to the employees? When should we communicate with other stakeholders? There's a lot of different I would say stakeholders that need to be communicated with when it comes to change. So think about what's that process, like really pulling it apart. And lastly, for the how questions, how do we change our operational practices for the better? How do we change the way we treat and communicate with our employees? How do we communicate the organization's services to its other stakeholders? And how do we get this business from point A to point B? So this is a very solutions, results-oriented process. However, it really considers all of the different details, right? Like you have your bigger picture, which is the change that you have in mind. And then through this, the 5 W's and how in the design thinking process, it really helps you to consider all the different moving parts. So we'll move into a session closing. Creating a resilient workplace really entails individuals, colleagues, collaborators, and leaders to slow down and create a new process and identify what's working and what's not working. Then creating a workplace where people feel like they want to continue working and growing in is really critical. And while we know that change is not always easy and it can be very challenging where we meet resistance, I think taking a step back as an individual, engaging in a reflection process, identifying what's coming up for us and how this fits into our long-term solution. So I'm going to stop there and we can engage in a Q&A session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nadira, for the, some of the perspectives and some deep thinking that maybe we forget. So just bringing it back and trying to think. Yeah, if anybody, any questions, please can you unmute and ask? One question that is coming to my mind: how to, if we have to have a quick change, how does that communication need to happen? Or the sometimes it's really quick and people should be on the same page. So where do you think, or how did the communication should be carried?
So a quick change that immediately comes to mind for me, and this is just an example, is having to terminate an employee who's not performing that well, right? And so it's a quick change in terms of how we let staff know, how we make the decision to let that person go, and how we communicate that amongst the leadership team and the various different levels of staff. So I think the process is, I think just going through back to the design thinking process, like who's impacted. So one, of course, it's the terminated employee, and then it's also a team who's being impacted. So recognizing that we need to communicate first, or after that termination, takes place, we communicate with with the others on that specific team. Then we communicate it on an org-wide level. So of course, there's this decision-making process that happens, with other leaders or with the team, with the team's leader that's being affected. That's a whole process in itself. But then in terms of implementing this change, there are people who are going to be impacted by this change. So someone else may have to take on additional work after this employee is no longer with the organization. And then what does that work look like? So communication up front, and I think being transparent about what is happening right away rather than waiting. I think sooner is always, better than communicating later. And then I think developing a process or being very proactive about what those systems look like. What is the process for termination or the process for anything really, and getting ahead of it so that we don't spend so much time trying to think of like a quick way to communicate change to staff or to implement change.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That was a really great question.
Yeah, that's a difficult one too, in the sense to implement it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. There's so many different options for implementation. And, as, staff members or leaders, no matter what level you're at, you're always going to have to think through, how do I implement something very quickly, or how do I learn something new very quickly? And I think it really just starts with our mindset. And I think showing up, with a positive attitude, with a growth mindset. I think once we ground ourselves in that type of thinking, it creates a much better process.
Yeah, thank you so much. And could you give that what Srini asked, that one example, that how change was implemented and how it was how it took place, some case study or some example.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a few seconds to think through a good example of change management.
Yeah, while you think, I think,
Sure.
yeah, so definitely it was a very insightful presentation, Nadira. Thank you so much. And also the question that just now was asked and the way you answered, that was also very relevant. Thank you so much. And yes, I look forward to the other information you are going to share now.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I know organizations go through so many changes, and I think one change is, I think restructuring. I think also given the time that we're in and the way organizations are evolving and have to shift and make changes based on specifically maybe funding or revenue streams, that always has an impact in how decisions are made and the types of changes that are being implemented. And so, sometimes at the senior leadership or executive level, we're often making decisions about the organization structure, like who, what levels do we have employees at? What are we paying them? Thinking through our organizational chart, right? Like, are these teams, set up in a way that makes them really productive and efficient and really drives outcomes for an organization? So I think when you look at an organizational chart as a starting point, to have conversations and really do some forward thinking and planning for even the next 6 months, it's about having the conversation, right? Like raising the question around well, what is the next 6 months going to look like for our organization, and who's going to be impacted? Who do we need to include in this process? What is our why? Like, why do we need to do this? We may need to do this because we might not have as much funding in 6 months compared to what we have now. And so it's really, I think, pulling reports and pulling data and using data to inform our decisions and inform our thinking about like why we're doing this or why we need to create change in our organization. So it really starts at, that higher level. And then I think also just paying attention to what is happening throughout the organization in different teams. So, team or staff members may be sharing things with their leaders or their managers that may come back up to an executive team. So how do you take that information seriously? And then also, how do you incorporate some of what they're sharing into the change that's about to happen, within the next few months? So I think being able to gather as much data before you implement a change, such as like a restructuring or reorganization, and then using historical data also, and also looking at the financials, right? I think that's a big part of why organizations do these restructures and reorganize, their team and the way, teams are set up and the way roles are created for organizations. And so that's just one level, right? Like that's a very big lift. And I think then having conversations with, once it's decided amongst an executive level team about what changes will be made, I think there needs to be a way to communicate that to staff. And I think it needs to be a very thoughtful approach, and also identifying who needs to deliver that message. And oftentimes, I think that it is best for the leader of the organization. So it could be a CEO, an executive director, the president of the organization who delivers the message around change. Because I think, people want, even in my own experience, people want to hear from the leader of an organization, and they want to be able to ask that leader questions. And so creating spaces or even a focus group or focus groups throughout the organization to gather information, to gather feedback, and really take in what people are thinking and feeling, so that they don't feel left out. They also feel like they're somewhat still engaged in the organization in different ways. And I think just constantly communicating and checking in with people is really critical for the organization. And as we think about retention and engagement. So that's just, there's so many different examples of change. And, I'm just going to bring it back to the design thinking process. Is we always want to be considering who's being impacted, when does it need to happen? So really creating a timeline, or even, a short-term strategic plan or some sort of like project plan for creating change and organizing all that information and bits and pieces of what needs to be done.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Nadira, for explaining that. And if I can ask you, what does your organization do, and how, what's the main goal, or what do you do if
Yeah, I can
we
share
need
more.
to?
So NRNY Consulting, we really provide solutions-based consulting, coaching, training for small businesses, anywhere from small businesses to large-sized businesses. And we help people think through their processes. So for example, we offer HR consulting. So we'll look at what their hiring process looks like, their selection, interviewing, their handbooks, really diving deeply into policies, providing training to their staff around like change management, or some of the other topics that we offer around unstuck leader and helping people to move from being stuck to being unstuck. So that's just one example. And then we really just, we're thought partners with others. Sometimes, as an external organization, we'll come in and we'll see things differently than how, internal folks are seeing things. And we may provide recommendations around what we think may be best practices. So it's really developing those best practices together, but having, as an external person, I'm able to take a different approach with someone and really doing some of that one-on-one work or group work, whether it's like group trainings or group coaching. So there are very different levels of how, myself and my team work with organizations and individuals who work in those organizations. And then we also, just really think through efficiency and productivity, like what is the best solution that's going to yield the best outcomes for organizations. So whether that's increasing their impact, influence, and their revenues. And we also develop systems that could be implemented in the organization. So really taking an operations approach and looking at the structures and having these conversations with people to drive change.
Sure, excellent. So yeah, if any organization or any small businesses, that would be really helpful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So yeah, one more time, any other questions from anyone? If not, then I just to let you know that we have another very exciting session tomorrow at 12 p.m. EST about intelligent automation and future of work. How intelligent automation technologies are transforming the business process, workflow, and task automation. And our webinars are every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. EST, Eastern Time. And also on Thursday, we have Peak Performance Success Blueprint, the topic. And on Friday, we have our Let Us Talk It Youth series with a very interesting topic, that what you would have done if you had to redo high school. So yeah, these are the topics and these are the webinars that are coming in the next few days. And thank you so much, Nadira, for being part of our Let Us Talk It webinar series. And we appreciate your time, your efforts, and thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you so much again for having me. I really had a great time putting this together, for you today and everyone who joined us. Just a quick thing, I love to connect, have further conversations. So if anyone has any additional questions or thoughts and ideas, or even any feedback for me, like I'm very open to that. So you can send me an email. You can also find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I do also want to offer, to folks, I'm gifting everyone a coaching session with me. So, it's really up to you. If you want to take the coaching session, it's a great way to explore whatever is coming up for you and really implementing some real shifts in your career or your business. So putting that out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the information. And thank you everyone for joining in today in Zoom, on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And we hope that you will be with us every time we do a session. So, and you will inform others too. Thank you everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.